Hello, and welcome to this session on tips for successful online learning. To start off, let me introduce myself. My name is Meryl Vandermerwe, and you can hear both from my last name and my accent that I am not an American. In fact, I'm South African, but we moved to America, to Tennessee, in 2003. And when we moved, I started homeschooling. I homeschooled all four of our children, three of them all the way through up till the end of high school, and one of them until she was in 8th grade. I started teaching in the local co-op, and I've also been coaching a Science Olympia team. But in our local co-op, I started discovering my love of teaching others, other students, not just my own. In fact, often it was more fun teaching the other ones. And then after a period of time, I started taking my teaching online. And so I have been an online teacher as well as I still teach in the local co-op. My own children also did some online learning and have done that as they've continued through college as well. So online learning is something that I am familiar with. I do love all technology, but I also know its limitations. And so I hope that in this session, I can help you navigate this area of your child's learning. I'm assuming that you're either new to homeschooling or new to online education, or perhaps to both. Now, why online learning? Why do we even bother? Why not just do it the way we were probably taught and our parents were taught and their parents were taught? It worked just fine for us, didn't it? Well, of course, the world is constantly changing, and we need to bring up our children so that they can fit into the current world. They do need to learn how to use technology, and part of that is just learning as they're doing. So as they are online learners, they will be learning and they will be equipped to go out into a very techy world. Of course, nowadays, all colleges will require students to actually submit work online. So this is a good skill to learn before they get there. And they are likely at some point, if they do go to college, to also take some kind of an online class. The last reason that I want to give for using online learning is because of everything you can access when you go online. This is both in terms of different teachers. You're not just now having to select from teachers in your local area. You don't just have to do all the teaching yourself, but you now get exposure to any kind of teacher out there, and also beyond just actual teaching, just in how one learns online. There are just so many new ways of learning and new things you can do. For instance, just think about geography. Instead of just learning about a place through a textbook, you can now visit that place through Google Earth and through videos and through drone footage, perhaps even interacting with somebody from that country. So it just opens up all these new opportunities. The same thing in the sciences. There are lots of fantastic simulations which really bring the concepts alive in a way that you might not be able to just through a textbook. The last thing I want to consider here in the introduction is how much online learning. Now, as much as I love technology and I like online learning, I would suggest that this is just part of the way you teach, and that you balance online learning with in-person classes, with learning from a book. I'm not a fan of textbooks, but you will hear the term living books a lot in the homeschool world. And this is learning perhaps through biographies and that kind of thing. And it's a much richer experience than just learning from a textbook. But I would suggest also just mixing things up. There are different types of online learning. We're going to look at that next. But give your child the experience of different types of learning and different ways of getting information so that they can see what works best for them, and they can also see there are many different ways to learn. I also just obviously don't think it's a great idea to have so much screen time, particularly if they're going to want to be doing some of their leisure activities online as well. So I think you want to just balance out how many online classes and how many online experiences you give your child versus other ways of getting the information. So let's look first at different types of online learning, because online learning is a very broad concept. The first thing you need to look at is there are synchronous and asynchronous types of learning. Synchronous is when it's happening live. This is when you're in a classroom and the teacher is there too, and the teacher is teaching and the students are there all at the same time. So it's happening in real time. The other kind is asynchronous. This means the learning is happening at different times for the learners. This particular conference is an asynchronous conference. I am recording this talk, you are listening to it at a different time. So those are two different things, and obviously both have advantages. Synchronous is great because they can actually interact in real time, but asynchronous can help fit into schedules. And you could do this at any time of the day. You don't have to be sure that you're always back in time for a live session. So there are pros and cons to each of those. Do remember with asynchronous, the fact that you can do it at any time can sometimes mean that it doesn't get scheduled, whereas if it's synchronous, you know this is the time, I don't have a choice, I have to be there. As I said, so there's flexibility, but there's also that being able to put it off. The second thing is there are different ways to learn online in the type of classes. You could have a classroom situation, whether it is a live class, your synchronous, or an asynchronous class, but the students are all together in the same space and they're all moving at the same time. And it's a proper class where they're going to get to the end and have studied English or US history or whatever it is. Then you have shorter ones, which are typically known as unit studies. These would have a much smaller area to study, so perhaps you will just be studying birds or World War II or whatever it is. And usually these don't last as long, and they usually are much more flexible in the way that they are run. And thirdly, there is simply the parent-led type. Parent-led, I'm meaning here that this is a case that you as the parent decide how your child is going to learn online. So you may be using a different curriculum, or you may be entirely creating your own, and say you're studying birds, and so you go on to Audubon site and you start to look and see what you can see there. You go to explore.org and you find a nesting owl and you start to watch the webcam. You go and find a video online which explains the lives of birds. You find a game, things like that, where you as the parent are going to be choosing what your child does online. For classes, there are obviously lots of different things available. Unit studies, those are not as many yet that are truly online. And when I'm saying online, I'm meaning that the whole interaction is online. It's not just that you go and print something off that you buy online. So we're not talking sort of an ebook. We're talking about an actual interactive, to some degree, class. I do offer those. You'll see at the end I will talk about where you can find me. But Techie Homeschool Mom also offers unit studies, and there are starting to be more people offering this kind of thing too. Parent-led, if you're wondering where would I find all those resources, there are hundreds all over the website. I would encourage you to listen to my podcast, which is Homeschooling with Technology. The sessions are short, just sort of 10 or 15 minutes, and you will see that I give you many ideas for ways that you can do this online learning with parents finding it. I give you lots of different sort of categories and things you'll see as to how to integrate it. Now, again, looking at different types of online learning, there is also self-paced versus deadlines. Self-paced, which typically your unit studies will be, and parent-led, it's up to them whether it's self-paced or deadlines. But it's just the kids go and they work whenever they want to. There is no deadline. The material is available as long as a person needs it. Again, this conference would be an example of self-paced. You can watch when you want and you can take as long as you want. The opposite is having a class with deadlines. And this is the kind that you're going to get when they go to college as well. This could either be a synchronous or an asynchronous. So a live one, you'd go online, the teacher would give the lesson, maybe ask questions, interact with the students, and then require them to turn work in. But you can even have asynchronous, which is the way I tend to teach, but I still have deadlines. The students can't just take as long as they want. It's due at a particular point, they need to submit it or it won't get graded. Then you have again the graded versus non-graded. Again, your synchronous classes are typically graded, but not always. Sometimes they're just for fun and they're more unit study type. It really just depends. Some of them are not graded at all, and some, which I could have given as an extra option, are parent graded. So the parents are given the information. The child can take as long as they want to do it, and the parent will check and see whether it's correct or not. Now again, you need to think to yourself, what do I want? Do I want someone else to be doing the grading for me? Do I want to do it myself? You can always save some money that way. It often depends on whether you feel qualified to be able to grade it or not. The deadlines is great if you're going to have a procrastinator. And I know if I take a class that doesn't have deadlines, I just seem to never finish it. So don't judge your children too harshly. Do think through that one as to what you want to do. Now let's just think about the actual physical requirements. Once you've decided that you're going to do online, whichever you're going to do it, a full class, just a small unit study. And unit studies are great when the kids are younger because it's a way to slowly get them into online learning without a full class. Or whether it's just going to be you as a parent finding things for them to do, you still are going to have some physical requirements. Now, if your children are doing things together, some of these won't really apply because you don't need a quiet place. They can all just sit together and play a game or watch a video or whatever it is. But if your children are going to be doing different things at different times, they do need to have no distractions and some quiet. They may need to have headphones or earbuds so that they can listen while their sibling, if they have a sibling, is doing something different near them. And obviously you need devices. Chromebooks are a cheap way of giving your kids each their own device if possible, but you just need to think through whether you have enough devices in your family. If they're going to be sharing, you need to take that into account when you start thinking through how much they're going to be doing online, because you can't expect your children to all be doing lots of classes online and you only have one device and you have 4 children. You're obviously going to run into trouble like that. Next thing is tech help. So you've now found your classes or you've set up what you want your children to do, whatever it is. Don't just say, they're kids, there it is, that's your class, see you tomorrow type of idea. You still have to make sure that your kids understand what they're doing and they know how to get on. First of all is if they're doing a classroom, they need to know how to access the LMS, Learning Management System. That's the way the classes are generally delivered. You need to make sure your child knows how to get on. If it's one specific time, they need to be ready beforehand so that they're there when the class is ready to start. But whatever it is, don't just assume that it's easy for them. Just help them get on. You need to see if they're submitting work, do they know how to do that? Don't, again, just think that they'll be able to do it. Sometimes when it's the first time around for them, or if they're younger, they may just not really get it. And you just should sit with them and work through the first few assignments with them to make sure they know what they're doing. Do they just know how to move from one assignment to the next? Do they understand how to get through, literally to finish one assignment, and do they know where to find the next one? Is it obvious? Some LMSs are more obvious than others. I know I tend to just force my students to work one thing after the other so they don't have the option of jumping around and perhaps doing things they shouldn't do before they were doing something else. But sometimes there is more flexibility and you just need to make sure that they understand exactly what they're doing. They may also need to be submitting work through screenshots, or they may need to scan their work. Don't just take photos. Those are often blurry. Just make sure you have some kind of scanning app on a phone and use that. I like Scannable, but there are lots of different ones. You can just find something that's free that would work. So just make sure they actually understand the techie aspects so they don't get completely overwhelmed. And even if you assign them something, make sure they understand how to get on, how they're moving around. If it's some kind of a game you're asking them to play or a simulation they're doing, just sit with them for a few minutes. Make sure they've got it before you just leave them to their own devices. Next thing is, don't assume that your kids know these things. First thing to look at here is the teachers may be using rubrics and maybe giving instruction somewhere in the assignment. Hopefully they are at least giving the instructions, but I like to use rubrics, and I know a number of teachers do. Your children need to understand that they should check that rubric before they submit their homework, because that is going to show them where the points are and how to get those points. And these are just good things for your kids to know before they hit college, because this is definitely going to apply there. Make sure that they read carefully. They don't just see a video and just click or start to watch it, because maybe there was instruction of something they need to do while they were watching. So they do need to just pay attention. Next thing is, as your children start to submit work online, you need to make sure they understand about plagiarism. Now, they should have been taught this at some point in their lives, but you just never know. If your kids have been at school and now you're homeschooling, just go through this with them. Again, you can find good videos on YouTube to teach your kids if you're not sure exactly what constitutes plagiarism or not. But basically, they can't just take something they find online. And this is the thing when they're working online. They get asked to, talk about the what they can see when they go to Paris. It's so easy for them just to Google that and then cut and paste. But the teachers are going to know, believe me. I use teaching assistants and they know. It's really obvious when the work is not your own child and they are just submitting something they've cut and pasted. They need to be able to look at something online, move away and make the notes and then rewrite it in their own words. So it's what they say and it's not just cutting and pasting, because they're not learning from that. And you can get kicked out of college and schools if you plagiarize. So explain to them that this really is a very bad form of cheating and that they need to know how to do it. And the next thing you need to make sure your kids understand is the whole concept of copyright. They can't just find a photograph online somewhere or somebody else's work and just submit it as their own. They do need to see whether they can even use those photos or graphics they find. And if they can use them, they need to see how they need to attribute it and whether they do need to actually say where it's from. But these things are owned by people. And again, violating copyright is just a way of stealing. If your children have some kind of a class that requires online tests, do make sure that you and they understand, are these open book or are they not? If they're open book, well, then they could probably use anything they like to get the answers. But if they're not, you need to perhaps proctor your child so that they aren't tempted to do something that they shouldn't be doing. Maybe just be in the same room as them and make sure that they do this correctly. But you just need to check that. Sorry, I have 2 5s instead of 4 and a 5. Just notice that now as I'm going through it. The next thing you need to look at is communication. 2 different types of communication are important here, is the student-teacher communication and the parent-teacher communication. You need to start teaching your child that if they're in an online classroom, obviously this doesn't apply if you've just found them things to do, but they do need to know that if they're getting stuck or if they don't understand something, they need to reach out to the teacher just the same way they'd put their hand up in class or perhaps stay afterwards and talk to the teacher. They can do that online too. The teachers should be really accessible. If they're not, that's very poor. But if, and this is a self-paced class, sometimes self-paced and not graded and no deadlines, those are not going to have any teachers involved in it. So just check that if you're wanting that. But if it's a class that has deadlines and grading, the teacher should be there. The student should be taught to politely email and ask. Parents, unless we're talking here about small children, if your child is middle school or high school age, teach them to speak to the teacher. They need to learn how to do that in a polite fashion. And only if they do not get satisfaction should you get involved. However, as a parent, there are times you should get involved. If it's a young child, obviously that would be a reason. But also, you should also, if there's perhaps something you need to tell the teacher, like if a child has learning struggles, let the teacher know so that they give a bit more leeway and they understand if perhaps, things come in a little differently, because most teachers will be prepared to work with you and your child. But this is probably something your child doesn't want to reach out and say, so you tell them. Also, if your child gets sick, email the teacher and let them know. That's also a time when it's perfectly acceptable for the parent to speak up. The next one is make sure that the online learning is effective. A couple of things here is make sure your child takes breaks from the screen. Don't just sign them up for class after class after class so that they're just sitting on the screen all the time. That's extremely bad for them and they really need to get away. Even if they're doing quite a lot of online learning, make sure that you punctuate it with times outside, perhaps time when they can be doing something physical, stop for snack breaks, do other work that's not involved with online. Just make sure that they're getting that. And the next thing is active learning. you can use a computer passively and actively. If they're just sitting and watching lectures all the time, it's going to be really tough for them to concentrate, even if they're amazing videos. I would suggest you at least get your child to take notes if there's a lot of videoing happening. I know in my classes, I try to make it so that there's minimal amount of just sitting and staring at the screen and watching, but rather that they're researching, they're playing a game, they're interacting on a website, so they're actually more involved. And just watch out for that and try and make sure your child is getting that. The same thing, as I said, don't just put the screen up there and tell your child to watch a whole bunch of videos. At least get them to be making notes of something that they're doing while they're watching. Or mix it up, have some kind of quizzes and things that they're doing and they're playing in between so that they're actually actively involved. And lastly, engagement. Now, if they are in an online class where there's a teacher speaking and the teacher asks questions, encourage your child to actually participate as they would do in a live classroom. Get them to actually be putting down their ideas and responding to the teacher, because this is where the fun happens. This is where learning happens, when your child is actually doing the learning and they're not just sitting there passively and just taking it all in. And if you find you perhaps give your child a quiz or you send them onto an interactive website, make sure that they're not just clicking through things without actually paying attention to what they're doing, that they really are engaging with the material and getting the best from it. Not all online learning is equal, and you need to be constantly monitoring and saying what my child is doing, whether it's an online class or what you're assigning, is this effective? Online is not always best. And so make sure that they're actually really getting what you're hoping that they get from it, and that you're not just using the online as some kind of a babysitter, but rather as a fantastic dynamic learning tool, because it really can be, but you need to make sure it's that. Then let's look at the outcomes. What are you hoping for your child to get out of their online learning? And you should think about this. Don't just think, oh, online class, that's going to be good. Or, oh, I'm just going to get my child play this game or work through this or play on these simulations. You need to have an actual purpose and then make sure that it's achieving that. So the first thing is, if they're doing classes, are there deadlines, and is your child meeting the deadlines? I teach online. I'm always so surprised at how many children do not meet the deadlines and just start to fall further and further behind. In my classes, as you will find in many online classes, the parent can also be in the classroom. They're there as an observer. So the parents can always see exactly what their students are doing. And yet they don't seem to be looking. In fact, many of them don't even take that opportunity to actually sign up and be involved. Stay involved. Make sure your child is actually meeting the deadlines. Check their progress. Are they moving through the work? If you're going to be using something that's self-paced, this is very important. You need to make it clear to your child how much you expect them to do each day, when you expect them to be done by. It's no use just saying, here we go, here's an online course in the history of music, and I want you to finish it by the end of the semester. Well, very few teens, and definitely not younger students, are going to be able to just manage their time that well. They're going to be done in time. You need to say, this is where you need to be this at the end of this week, or this is how much you need to do today. And then you need to be watching that they're doing that. Watching the online classes, that they're actually doing what they're supposed to, and they're not just doing something quickly and not well. Because that's the other thing we'll find in the online classes, is that students will submit work and it's just so poor. They haven't actually put any effort in, and they're not getting anything out of it when they're doing that. And then obviously check the grades if it's a class. Again, I will sometimes get a parent panicking near the end when they realize how bad their child's grades are. Well, they've had access to their child's grades all year. And, the teachers don't have time often to go back and tell every parent, have you looked to see what your child is doing? I'm assuming the parents are watching because I've given them that access. So just be present in your child's online lives and look and see what is going on. And if they're having problems and their grades are poor, look to see what the matter is. And, do they need help? Do they need a tech assistant? Do they need a quiet place? All these things I've already gone through. Do they not understand? Do they need to be speaking to the teacher? Do they need additional help? Come alongside and help them in these different things. Well, I hope some of these tips have been helpful. I would love to connect with you if you found this a useful seminar. If you want to hear more about how to use technology, as I said, find my podcast, Homeschooling with Technology. You can find it anywhere you normally get a podcast. Apple and Google, both of them have it on their podcasts. You can also find it on Spotify and pretty much anywhere else you'll find it. You can even ask Alexa to play the latest one. Then I teach at Fundafunda Academy. You can email me at any time at Meryl, MERYL, at fundafunda.com, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. And for those of you homeschooling teens, I do have a Homeschooling College Bound Teens Facebook group that you're welcome to come and join and ask for any advice specific to that. I wish you luck as you embark on online learning. It is fantastic. There are so many opportunities, and I hope your children have a very rich experience in online classrooms and learning through online technology in the years to come.